Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Please be seated. For the last few months, I've been listening with kind of half an ear to the Democratic presidential primaries. It's still pretty early, there's still too many candidates, but there's some interesting ideas kind of being bandied about, and the one that caught my attention a few weeks ago was the proposal put forward by Alex Ross about a universal basic income. I've done some reading about this. It's an idea that's been around since the 50s and 60s. Martin Luther King proposed it as a means of addressing poverty. The idea is you provide a basic income to all citizens so that they can provide for their basic needs. There's a lot of debate in economic circles about how effective that would be, but it ties into an issue that I know I'm concerned about, I know that many of you are concerned about the great inequity in wealth and in income and in wealth in this country and in fact around the world. We have a very small number of people who have an enormous amount of money, and we have a large number of people, most people, 99.999%, who have a whole lot less. And the difference between the very well off and the rest of us keeps getting bigger. The wealthy keep getting wealthier, and the rest of us can't keep up. I do some reading in this area, and I tell you, I get kind of depressed. I throw my hands up. As I said, I'm not an economist. I don't really know what the solution is. I acknowledge that capitalism has brought about the greatest standard of living in the United States that the world has ever seen, that it has some benefits, but I'm very concerned about the inequity of the way goods are distributed in this country and around the world. My response to it is, at the end of the day, to kind of throw my hands up, retreat to my own little corner of the world and tend to my financial house and do what I can. I follow in the New York Times a column, Your Money, written by Ron Lieber. I like a lot. He's got some good basic suggestions on maintaining your own financial house. I heard an interview with him a while back on NPR in which he talks about how he's struggling with how to teach his children, his young children, to be good stewards of what they've been given and how to think about money as they become adults. As his children were getting old enough to receive an allowance, he says he talked to his friends, and it seemed like there were two big camps that they fell into. There were folks who didn't give their children allowances, but rather when their children wanted something, they would have a discussion about whether it was something they really needed or the like and decide, and if they did, then the parents would pay for it. Another school of thought that you give your child an allowance in exchange for them doing some chores around the house. And Lieber says that's okay, except he worries that if the kid decides that they don't really care about money, then they'll just stop doing chores, and really helping out around the house isn't something maybe that kids should be paid to do, but rather something they need to do as members of the family. He's come up with a system that I like a lot that he uses with his 7-year-old daughter. They provide her an allowance, and then she puts it in 3 different pots, a third, and a third. The first third she can spend on anything she wants. She doesn't have to ask her parents' permission, and her parents just bite their tongue when she goes off and spends it on something frivolous or something they don't really think is worthwhile. The second third she has to save for longer-term purchases, and those purchases have to be agreed on between her and her parents. They have a discussion about whether that's all right. And the final third, and the pot that Ron says his daughter spends the most time over, much more time than over the other 2 pots, is money that she gives away for some cause or charity that she wants to support. And he says this 7-year-old daughter spends an enormous amount of time weighing this and that idea, various ways she might make the world a better place, at least her little corner of it. I tell you, I like this idea a whole lot. When we were kids, my sisters and I got an allowance. It was 25 cents a week back then. You can imagine all the wonderful things we bought for ourselves. And so I broke my rule of not meddling or even appear to meddle in my sister's parenting of my nephews, and I sent them this article. The crickets that I got back reminded me of the good rule that I had of not appearing to meddle in my sister's parenting. But I hand it on to you parents and grandparents, for your consideration. I relay all of this to you because I think these questions about how we manage our own money, how we are good stewards of what we've been given. The questions about wealth, inequality, and inequity are all tied up and swimming around in this very confusing and perplexing parable that Jesus tells this morning in Luke's Gospel. This is probably Jesus' most confusing parable. Biblical scholars are all over the map trying to make sense of what it is he's trying to say. And I'm going to just give you my thoughts based on some of the reading I've done. I'm not saying that this is absolutely what he means to say by it, but hopefully to get you chewing on it. This parable raises more questions than it answers, and that means it's a really good parable. That's the job of a parable, is to get you thinking, scratching your head and saying, what? So it's a good parable, and we're going to just dive into it. There is, Jesus says, a wealthy man, and this wealthy man has a manager. It turns out that the manager has been squandering the wealthy man's fortune somehow. We're not really told what he's been doing, and in fact the Greek implies that maybe it's possible that he has been unfairly accused of squandering the wealthy man's fortune. The wealthy man tells the manager that he's fired, and the manager realizes that he's up between a rock and a hard place. There's no way he's going to get another job like this, managing someone else's wealth. He's not able to do the kind of physical labor, the only kinds of jobs that would be open to him, digging in the mines. That would kill him, he thinks. And the begging for scraps is really no better. It's as much a death sentence as going to work in the mines. So he comes up with this plan. He's gonna slash the bills that people owe his boss, and hope that then, once he loses his job, that he'll be welcome in their homes, that they'll return the favor. And so he brings one guy in and asks, how much olive oil do you owe my master? And he says, 100 measures. And he says, take your bill, cut it, and make it 50. And he has another guy come in and says, how many measures of wheat do you owe my master? And he says, 100. He goes, slash it, make it 80. And then the most perplexing thing of all about this, when the wealthy man hears what his manager has done, he doesn't throw him in prison, he doesn't get angry, he doesn't get red in the face, he says, well done. Well, we don't know what happens after that, whether the manager's still off the job or what. He doesn't fill us in on those details. But it's a perplexing parable. What in the world could Jesus be meaning by this? I have to think that the folks who were listening to Jesus originally really could have cared less about what went on between the wealthy man and the manager. The folks who were listening to Jesus tell this parable originally were, for the most part, the 99.9%. They were subsistence farmers who rented land from people like the wealthy man to farm on. They were fishermen. They were shepherds. These are people who live very, very close to the bone. Starvation is a real possibility, a real threat for them day in and day out. And there is no way in the ancient world for them to get ahead. You don't become an entrepreneur in first century Palestine. You don't invent the next Uber or Facebook. That's not an option. The reason the wealthy man is wealthy is because he inherited it from his parents, who inherited it from their parents, who inherited it from their parents. And probably what he inherited was a vast quantity of land, which he then in turn rents out to these farmers and charges them an exorbitant amount of rent in the form of a large proportion of their harvest at the end of the year. Now, Jesus' listeners have seen wealthy men around. They see their houses up on the hillside. They can imagine what that life is like. They see them come to the festivals in Jerusalem all dressed up, looking very fine with their wives and households and in these big processions. And they can fall asleep at night staring up at the stars, dreaming about a different life. A life that they'll never have. But it is kind of fun. In the same way it's fun for you and I to imagine winning the lottery. It's fun to imagine what life must be like for those wealthy people. They've never met one, in the same way that you and I have never met Mark Zuckerberg. But they think it might be, it's interesting. It's a fun thought experiment. It's a good way to spend some time imagining what their life might be like. Jesus' listeners know the manager. They have had many dealings with people just like him. The manager is the guy who shows up at the end of the year, at the end of the harvest, to collect the rent. And they're never quite sure whether this is actually the rent or whether the manager is padding his pockets. It always seems that they don't have quite enough to pay whatever the rent is, the measures of wheat and olive oil and cattle and the like. They're always a little behind, and they're always having to cut a deal. I can't quite make it. Can I pay you next year? And the manager, of course, says, sure. It'll just cost you 50% more, 100% more. There are late fees, there are penalties, there's interest. Jesus' listeners know that story. They get deeper and deeper and deeper in the hole, further and further behind, further from the dream of ever being able to just be comfortable for a season or two. And the person they have, the face they have to put to their misery is that manager. So they don't really care a whole lot about the rich man getting cheated out of a little bit of his overwhelming wealth. They really don't care about the manager losing his job at SOE. But they go away from this story thinking, hey, for once, the little guy got something. For once, that guy who owed 100 measures of olive oil just owes 50. Caught a break. Life is a little lighter. The guy who owed 100 measures of wheat just owes 80. A little prize just dropped out of the sky and fell in his lap. That never happens. They go off thinking, that is great. And I wonder, as they get down the block and around the corner, a little closer to their home, or as they're talking over the story with their friends at the pub on the corner, they start thinking, okay, what was Jesus saying there? Is Jesus saying that God is sneaky? That he's crooked? Is Jesus saying that the kingdom of God, that justice, comes into the world through shady dealings? Is that really what he was saying? Maybe after a few hours, a couple days, that stays with them. And they vacillate, they go back and forth between being really angry about the economic system they find themselves in, where they're always behind, always getting deeper in the hole, and feeling a little hopeful that maybe God is working on it in unexpected and unlooked for ways through the crooked dealings of that manager. And then maybe they start thinking about their own life. Wasn't it just last week that my neighbor came, knocked on the door, and said, we don't have any grain. Could you possibly just lend us a measure of grain, and we'll pay you back next week when the harvest is done? And didn't I just say, sure, just, have a measure of grain. Just, give me 2 measures next week. Wasn't it just last harvest season when the guy down the street came and needed a quart of olive oil? And you said, sure, just when the harvest comes in, come back and give me a gallon. Maybe, am I no better than that manager, than that wealthy man taking advantage of people in need, people who are down on their luck, people who are further down on the food chain than I am? Maybe you start to think, maybe I can be part of the solution in my own little limited way. And they slash their neighbor's bills. They just get that measure of wheat back. Or they decide that they won't even collect that. Take it and be well. Maybe they could be part of God's kingdom breaking into the world in their own little corner of it. Fred Craddock, a preacher I like a lot, wrote, most of us will not this week christen a ship, write a book, end a war, appoint a cabinet, dine with the queen, convert a nation, or be burned at the stake, and I would add, solve the problem of economic injustice. More likely, that we will present no more than a chance to write a note, visit a nursing home, teach a Sunday school class, share a meal, tell a child a story, feed the neighbor's cat, and help baptize a baby into the church. May this perplexing and confusing parable get us to think about our little corner of God's kingdom. get us to think about how we steward the resources, the gifts that we have been given. How we can use our third jar to make life a little better for others, to be part of God's good work in our own good time. Amen. During the hymn, I'm going to ask the family to come forward. If our young